Hello, and welcome everyone to this week's seminar of the Living Earth Collaborative and Washington University's Evolution, Ecology, and Population Biology program. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce our speaker for this week, Catherine Werner. I also have the pleasure of mentioning that this week's seminar is being co-sponsored by the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity, or CRE squared for short, at Washington University. Catherine is the Sustainability Director for the City of St. Louis and is an experienced environmental attorney, educator, and urban sustainability practitioner. While in this role, Catherine has balanced environmental issues alongside socioeconomic considerations, including health and equity. Emblematic of her integrative approach to sustainability, Catherine has spearheaded development of an award-winning sustainability plan for the City of St. Louis and has launched numerous sustainability programs for the city, including but not limited to the Climate Protection Initiative, Sustainable Neighborhood Initiative, Milkweeds for Monarchs, the St. Louis Butterfly Project, and the Urban Vitality and Ecology Initiative. Catherine has been a leader of climate action and climate justice in the city. For example, Catherine has led development of the first climate action and adaptation plan and climate vulnerability assessment for the city, has overseen numerous awards, including the American Cities Climate Challenge Award and the City Energy Project Award, and has led the effort to earn St. Louis City compliance with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Catherine is a LEED accredited professional, obtained her JD from the Washington University School of Law, and her undergraduate degree from Duke University, where she earned an AB in political science. We are just thrilled to have Catherine join us today for what is sure to be an engaging talk on how equity can be centered in urban biodiversity, climate justice, and eco-literacy. As Catherine gives her seminar, please leave your questions in the live chat, and we will relay them to her after her talk. And with that, I will hand it over to Catherine.
Matt, thank you so much. And Tasha, this is such an honor for me to be delivering this seminar presentation today. I'm just thrilled that the Living Earth Collaborative and also the Center for Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity thought to have me present to you. And the topic is something that is very near and dear to my heart. So this is very exciting for me. Thank you very much for this honor. So today, my presentation topic actually, I think, was advertised under two different names. You may have come to it because of this title, Centering Equity in Urban Biodiversity, Climate Justice, and Eco-Literacy, or you may have seen it because of Urban Nature and Intentionality, Elevating Eco-Literacy, Urban Biodiversity, and Equity. But not, it's the exact same presentation. You're in the right place no matter why you came to the presentation today. We're going to be covering all of these things. So for those of you who may not have a whole lot of familiarity with St. Louis, I'd like to give you a little bit of background that relates to some of the topics that we'll be covering today. Let's talk a little bit about the natural heritage of St. Louis. As you probably know, St. Louis, the city and the region, sits pretty much at the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, which becomes the largest North American watershed, fourth largest watershed in the world, actually. So we have a natural heritage of big rivers. We also have natural heritage of Targus Prairie. And you can see on the left, the pre-settlement prairie indications in orange colors throughout sort of the top half and southwestern portions of Missouri, and then the red circle, kind of the St. Louis city and metropolitan area circled. We're also right smack in the middle of the migratory bird Mississippi Flyway, which is one of the most important for migratory birds in the area, in the country. And also another migratory corridor for the Monarch Butterfly. All of these things are relevant to some of the things that we'll be talking about later on in the presentation. There's a red circle about where we are in St. Louis. You can see in the migratory pathway of the monarch, they go up in the spring in the yellow arrows and south in the fall in the red arrows toward Mexico. A little bit about the city of St. Louis. We have about 3,000 acres of parkland managed by the city itself, 10 community recreation centers, a population of about 300,000 people, and about 108 city parks, plus the National Park Service land of the Gateway Arch National Park and places like Missouri Botanical Garden and gorgeous green space down at the garden. So let me tell you about my role in the city of St. Louis as the city's first sustainability director. I've been there about a dozen years now. And one of the things that we developed was the first sustainability plan. It is triple bottom line in scope and orientation. And by triple bottom line, you're probably familiar with that terminology, but basically it is not just an environmental look at sustainability, but it balances environmental considerations, needs, concerns, opportunities with those of social or economic focus as well. And the sweet spot, the nexus of those social, economic, and environmental, that is what we call triple bottom line sustainability. You can see the 7 functional categories or topical areas of the sustainability plan in the center of the screen. You can see it goes well beyond just environmental sustainability issues. So what we're going to be focusing on as a subset within that vast sort of comprehensive sustainability plan and initiative is a focus on the ecological and environmental aspects today, or what I like to call biophilic urbanism. Because we're in the urban core where people are at the center of really pretty much every decision, that is where equity comes in. And we're going to be talking about the intersection between biophilic urbanism and equity. What do I mean by that? Here are some examples, a number of different issues, and we'll be covering many of these in the presentation today relating to biophilic urbanism and equity. But at the core, it's really people who are at the center of these considerations. I'm going to be talking more about the why and the what and the how and the strategies. I just want to pause for a moment and take that step back, set the stage for why this is so important. Well, first of all, we know that nature needs people, for example. People help create habitat. People conduct citizen science and share data for research. Sometimes it's a student, and sometimes it's something more formal like a researcher at a university. People care for natural resources through stewardship. And people manage land for restoration and enhancement. So nature needs people. But at the same time, you can see that the puzzle pulling together there, nature needs people. People need nature. And there's a lot of documented research showing that when people connect with nature, they have educational benefits. Their test scores improve. They have faster learning. Their creativity is stimulated. There are also community benefits for connections with nature, fostering a sense of place, building stronger relationships, increasing civic participation. Very prominent in people's minds these days, and certainly during the pandemic and before, is the connection between people and nature for health and well-being. It is, again, well documented that when people have good access to and connections with nature, their levels of stress and anxiety can reduce. That the greater connections with nature can result in lower prevalences of chronic diseases. People tend to exercise more when there's more green space available to them. And even just use to nature can promote faster healing rates. And finally, sometimes there are even financial benefits associated with people and nature. Boosted property values and retained workers, retail shopping experiences, lowering your utility costs. All of these things can be social and economic benefits for people connecting with nature. So when all is said and done, it's so important, I think, to remember that nature needs people and people need nature. It's not a one or the other, or one's more important. This is a twofer here. So what I'm going to be spending my time talking about today is what I like to term intentionality. You're seeing before you a pyramid, if you will. It is taken from a concept from some colleagues and researchers at the University of Virginia through the Biophilic Cities membership and collaboration, of which the City of St. Louis is now a part. And it is to create a nature pyramid or a recommended nature diet. How often do people need to be connecting with nature? Well, like the USDA food pyramid, where they recommended you eat the most of the things on the bottom and a little bit less of things on top and more at the very top, maybe just those occasional sweet things or treats. The same kind of thing is true for maybe your connection to nature diet, recommended nature diet. So you can see here the daily recommended dose of nature, if you will, is as much as you can get, but even just small little bits is something that's important. But get it on a daily basis. Weekly, maybe you're going to take a spin out into your local park. Monthly, maybe you're going to go a little bit further and visit a state park, or maybe even annually, you're going to have your annual vacation to a fantastic national park, the Grand Canyon, or here are the pictures of Singapore, something incredibly fantastic and biologically diverse and rich. Well, we can't do that every day. We can't do that every week, every month, but getting those connections to nature on a frequent basis and having the opportunity to have nature-rich experiences that are meaningful, that are more and more immersive and significant can have quite an impact on people. So I've got here sort of a collection of my top 10 or greatest hits of intentionality. I'm going to start here with, let's improve those connections with nature. Well, how can we do that? Some of the three top strategies that I tend to employ are looking at quantity of nature, the quality of that nature, and accessibility to nature. And when I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about physical accessibility, how people can get to nature, although that certainly can be a starting point or a barrier, but I'm also talking about psychological and emotional, intellectual accessibility. Not all people feel safe or welcome in natural spaces. And so addressing these issues and obstacles and lowering these barriers, this makes connections to nature more accessible. I'm going to pause and challenge us all to rethink what has become sort of a common, fortunately, something popular in today's realm, which is equitable access to nature. Everyone says we should have equitable access to nature. And of course we should. But let's just take a closer look at what do we mean and when we use these terms, equitable access to nature. Some of you may be familiar with a national nonprofit organization, the Trust for Public Land, and they do an annual park score rating of the 100 largest cities every year. And City of St. Louis has been participating for about, 6-7 years now. And in 2021, you can see we had a ranking of number 16 out of 100 cities. And the 5 criteria are listed here: access, investment, acreage, amenities, and equity. These are the criteria upon which the Trust for Public Land gives their ratings to the cities. So number 16 is impressive. Let's take a little bit closer look. Let's look at access. When we look at access, the Trust for Public Land is trying to figure out how do residents have access, easy access to green space, parks, and trails. Can they get there? Can they walk there within 10 minutes? It's not as a crow flies. Can you get to a green space, park, or trail within a 10-minute walk? So if there is a barrier, let's say a highway, you can't cross that highway, you can't get there, that doesn't count. It's how you can walk to that green space, park, or trail. And if you look, this is obviously the city of St. Louis, and all of the green is pretty good, and those dark green areas are those green space, parks, or trails. And so if it is a little reddish or orangish, that is where there is less good access. But at the end of the day, 98% of the residents of the city of St. Louis live within a 10-minute walk of a green space, park, or trail. That's phenomenal, especially when you look at the national trend. The national average is only 55% of residents live within a 10-minute walk. So St. Louis is nearly double in terms of access. And so in some respects, that is equitable access to green space, parks, and trails. And some would say, well, we've achieved it. We've 98%, we're nearly at 100. We're 16 out of 100 cities. That's good enough. but is it? Let's take a little bit closer look. Let's look at the equity consideration criteria here. Now, very interestingly, the Trust for Public Land looks at two different sub-criteria, race and income, and gives the city of St. Louis a score of 73 out of 100, which is respectable. It is not nearly as good as 98%, and there's certainly room for improvement. But they have some very, very interesting information here. And if you look at race, and the people of color are noted in blue outlines by census block group, are predominantly living in North St. Louis. Some are familiar with the Del Mar Divide, if you will. So people of color predominantly here, having less access to green space, parks, or trails in some respects. When you look at the low income versus high income, it is not necessarily the same. You can see they're low income in different parts of the city, having some different experiences. So some have, that has a lower rating for low income households. Still, this is something that there's room for improvement and something to work with, and we can move forward. Let's take a real world example of looking at two schools in St. Louis. One is the Biome School, and this is pictured here on the left. This is a K-5 Targus School. It is located here on this map. It is just north of the Central West End, just south of Del Mar Boulevard. You can see it's got a lot of green through the Google map there. Some of that green is because they're in a leafy neighborhood, but a lot of this green is because there are prevalent vacant lots. And in fact, this is a vacant lot adjacent to the Biome School. The other school I wanted to give an example about is the Hawthorn Leadership School for Girls. And this one is located literally across the street from a city park, Sherman Park, and a community recreation center, World Center. So it is right there in, again, a pretty green area, if you're looking at Google Maps from vegetation cover. So we've got two schools with a lot of access, equitable access to nature, right? Well, what is it that these students are actually accessing? You take a closer look to the nature, and mostly I'm seeing a lot of fescue, maybe a few dandelions thrown in for good measure. But this isn't exactly something that I would call robust, valuable nature. What if we replaced those dandelions, or at least supplemented them, with even clovers and spring beauties and a carpet of wildflowers that these students could be accessing? Wouldn't this be a arguably better experience? And let's take it to the next step. What about showing that these students and all individuals, all residents, had access to high quality biodiverse nature? And of course, these pictures have been taken in Kennedy Woods Prairie Savannah area, in Forest Park, a visiting school group, and obviously there are residential areas nearby. But this would be a great goal to have, that all people could access this kind of biodiversity. Excuse me. So in my opinion, respectfully, I think that the Trust for Public Lands Park Score is a fantastic tool, has some great data sets and information and guidance, but it has an important omission, or it leaves out something very important, and that is that the green space, the access, equitable access and access to nature as measured through the park score, does not factor in the quality of that green space. So I think there's an opportunity to take a closer look, ensure that it's not just equitable access to green space, but it is equitable access to high quality, ecologically functioning, biodiverse green space. And in order to do that, you have to center equity in your consideration of making sure that that access is resulting. And why? Again, we know that people thrive with access to high quality nature, such as biologically diverse habitat for a variety of species. It is well documented. We also know that there is this virtuous circle. So the more urban biodiversity that you have, the better the quality of the nature connection. That's going to promote and foster eco-literacy, maybe encourage greater community-based citizen science, which feeds back into greater urban biodiversity and research. So it's a nice virtuous circle, something, again, to strive for. So let's take a little bit closer look at my next intentionality tip, and that is to promote biodiversity in nearby nature. So if we went back to our pyramid, our recommended nature diet, that bottom level of daily access to nature, that is what I would call nearby nature. The things that's easy. You walk out your front porch and there is nature. You are on your way to school, on your way to work, wherever it might be. That is nearby nature. These easy, recurrent experiences. You really don't have to go out of your way. Let's bring nature to where people are and are going, and let's see what we can do about pumping it up and making sure that that nature is more biodiverse. By the way, all of these things were taken in my backyard in the Central West End. I think all of them in the backyard, maybe the front yard. Oh, not the red, but front yard. Anyway, so when we started thinking about, okay, great, let's try and make nearby nature biodiverse. And how do we track it? And how do we do that in St. Louis? We took a step back and said, what is the way to measure urban biodiversity? And as it turned out, no one had really given much thought to establishing a methodology for assessing and measuring and gathering and rating urban biodiversity. And so fortunately, we were very fortunate to get a grant through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, an innovation fund grant. And the city of St. Louis partnered with four other cities, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Portland, and San Francisco. And we hired, with our grant funds, a consultant with Tamara consultant team. And we worked with the Missouri Botanical Garden as our fiscal agent, for which I'm very grateful. And we developed together a national framework for measuring urban biodiversity inventory. It's really a methodology and something that can be used from city to city so that it was apples to apples consideration for when a city wanted to pursue urban biodiversity. So this took a couple of years. It was a fantastic process. It was rather academic in its orientation, if you will. And so I was very eager at the end of the day to have this tool to apply it to St. Louis and find out what our urban biodiversity inventory was in St. Louis. And as it turns out, it was much harder than one had thought and required a lot more expertise. Fortunately, we have a ton of expertise in the St. Louis region, including folks from Washington University and the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Botanical Garden and the zoo. And actually through some support from the Living Earth Collaborative, we were able to pull together a team of experts in biology and ecology and had different biological expertise in various taxonomic groups and ecosystems, and dug deep into the questions of what would be a surrogate species or an indicator species of high quality functioning urban biodiversity for St. Louis. And we looked at three different habitats: urban prairie, urban wetland aquatic areas, and urban woodland forests. And we then looked at 6 different taxonomic groups, and you can see them on the left there, and came up with about 3 or so indicator species for each. Did the crosswalk and filled in the matrix, ended up with 55 surrogate species or indicator species, 36 of which are fauna and 19 flora. And if you look at the bottom part of the species list there, you can see some little red numbers. Those are the floristic quality index for the herbaceous and the woody plants. So, and by the way, all of these documents and tools and resources are all posted on the sustainability website, which I'll have a link to at the end, so you don't need to copy any of this stuff. So now that we knew what our indicator species were, we were anxious to start, to establish a baseline and figure out where we were in creating a rich environment filled with urban biodiversity. We picked 6 or so locations to do some urban biodiversity monitoring. And you can see they are both north, south, east, west, and reflect different shapes and sizes and locations of the city. And that's kind of when the reality struck that, gosh, the city doesn't have a Department of the Environment, doesn't have a Department of, an Office of Sustainability, really just one person. There's no biologist on staff, no ecologist on staff. There was no capacity within the city to do this monitoring of urban biodiversity. So it became very clear that we needed to continue to appreciate and work with our wonderful partners, whether they are researchers, working scientists working in the field on their studies, or all the way to individuals in their backyards or students in their classes. There's a way to gather urban biodiversity information. And one of the great ways is through community-based citizen science. Now, a favorite app that we have been using is iNaturalist. It's a free app you can download on your phone. And we have been encouraging folks to use this throughout the community, in particular in conjunction with an annual global event called the City Nature Challenge. The City Nature Challenge is something that has been held, it started in the West Coast and has grown to a global competition with hundreds of cities around the world. And it is held at the end of April. And so the St. Louis partners, the regional team, including these folks shown on the screen here, decided we were going to try and make it easy for people to participate in the City Nature Challenge, do some citizen science, do some observations. And of course, when you're doing an observation through iNaturalist, once you log in the data on your phone, it gets populated automatically into the cloud, and that becomes the city's urban biodiversity inventory. So we wanted to encourage people to look in particular for those indicator species. And so we went through the list and found the ones that might be visible or observable in April when the City Nature Challenge is held. And we pulled together some kind of cheat sheets or support tools. And we did that for each of the in this case, it was 5 different habitat areas, including Targus Prairie and the aquatic wetland areas. And we indicated sort of the gold star species, if you're really lucky, kind of the rare ones that you might see if you're super lucky and observant, and also something a little bit more lower bar, common, just so we didn't want to be put offish and frustrate people that they weren't seeing all of these different species. So we made these available. These are also available online, and we shared them with educators in particular. A couple of years, we reached out directly to schools. You can see a listing of some activities and school programs that participated in the City Nature Challenge. On the left of the screen, again, the Biome School, and this is from the Hawthorn Leadership Academy. That's where I took those photos back in 2018 during that City Nature Challenge observation opportunity. So it's a great way to include students and teachers in observing biodiversity and populating the city's urban biodiversity inventory at the same time. So let's talk a little bit more about that eco-literacy element. Citizen science is using the iNaturalist app in particular is a great way to foster eco-literacy. But before we kind of pushed on this, we wanted to again understand where we were, because we had set a goal when we put out the sustainability plan to double the city's eco-literacy rate. Well, if we're going to double the eco-literacy rate, we needed to know where we were in order to know if we had gotten there when we were going to double it. And once again, we found out there was no sort of uniform eco-literacy survey that cities were using to measure eco-literacy. This just wasn't on people's radars at the time. And so fortunately, we partnered with our experts again at the zoo and the garden in particular, and developed what I think is the first baseline eco-literacy survey. I've shared this with many other cities who have been interested. It's very simple. You can see it's just one page, and it looks at just a few different issues. But it was a way to take that baseline assessment. We disseminated it through our neighborhood improvement specialists, which were out in all throughout the entire city. And we got a pretty good response of about 600 responses, we limited the digital response to 200 because we really wanted to make sure that we were getting the hard copies that were distributed at the neighborhood association meetings. And together we found out that about 87% of people felt it was important to live near quality outdoor green spaces. Even more interesting is when we asked the question about why. What was their greatest concern? And the correlation, the outcome was their number one reason for why they wanted to live near quality outdoor green spaces was because of the impact on their health and well-being. My health and well-being. The close second was that of future generations. So this was really eye-opening. We went back to our indicator survey and indicator species list, and you can see there under invertebrates that the monarch butterfly is one of the indicator species. We asked, as part of the EcoLiteracy Survey, a couple of pointed questions. We said, monarch butterflies are all in the news these days. Please answer these couple of questions. One, are you aware of actions you can take to help monarch butterflies? And by the way, we didn't put any pictures in the survey. You saw the survey, there are no pictures. The answer in 2014 was 44% were aware of actions that they could take, less than half. Then we asked a bit of factual understanding. What plant does a monarch butterfly require? In 2014, the response was 45% correct. So what that answer is, it's milkweed, but only 45% of the individuals responded correctly in 2014. But now we had our baseline EcoLiteracy survey, and we could launch Milkweed for Monarchs, the St. Louis Butterfly Project, and see if what we were doing over the next coming years was going to have an impact and help improve, expand our ecoliteracy rate. Just quickly, pausing, why are we thinking about urban monarch conservation? Well, again, from our urban biodiversity indicator surrogate species, monarch butterfly is one of the surrogate species. But from a practical matter, monarch butterfly habitat is really sort of a euphemism or stand-in for Targus Prairie ecology, which in and of itself is sort of a stand-in for biodiversity. But the fact of the matter is many people don't really understand or want to talk about biodiversity, but they're very happy to talk about monarch butterflies. So in talking about monarch butterflies, we're really sort of bootstrapping in biodiversity and prairie ecosystems and ecology. So that was sort of a win-win there. Also, when we're talking about Monarch Gardens, we have an opportunity to do something very discreet and small and perhaps increase nearby nature. That again helps in turn promote ecoliteracy. That was our hypothesis anyway. So we wanted to make this as easy as possible. So we started again collaboratively with a number of different partners in the region coming together. This wasn't Catherine making this up. This was Catherine going to these different experts and saying, you're an expert in this plant or this pollinator or this butterfly. Please help me understand what the best result is. And so, for example, we came up with the St. Louis STL monarch mix, the plant list of 9 species that these experts said, this is what is going to help a monarch butterfly thrive. And you'll see it's a mix of milkweed and nectar species. And we also looked at things about availability in the St. Louis region and also seasonality and different colors and things like that. And once we had decided on the list, we wanted to help people know where they could get these plants. And so we reached out to nurseries and we encouraged them to carry these particular plants. And we put together the list of the nurseries that people could go to. We then told people how they could plant monarch gardens and how, once they planted them, how to take care of their monarch plants. We really wanted to be as supportive as possible to kind of push out this initiative. What we learned from these experts is that actually it only takes 1 square meter, very small area, to help a monarch butterfly, as long as you have those 9 native species, the St. Louis monarch mix of milkweed and nectar sources, you could create a viable monarch habitat mini size in a monarch garden. So the city of St. Louis decided to lead by example. Mayor Slay announced we would plant 50 monarch gardens in public spaces. And so the first 25 on the left of your screen, it shows one of the 25 or so firehouses that received a very small monarch garden of 9 plants. And you can see it's not big. We did a little bit bigger on the right side of the screen at City Hall, but these were intentionally located in places where people could access these monarch gardens and hopefully the monarch butterflies that would come to those gardens. Mayor Slay became an incredible champion of this initiative, and you see him here giving a proclamation to Colin O'Mara, who is the head of the National Wildlife Federation, who had come to St. Louis to launch the National Wildlife Federation's Mayor's Monarch Pledge. The city of St. Louis was the very first city to take the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which was the National Wildlife Federation effort. And then now several hundred cities across the mayors and cities across the country have taken that pledge. St. Louis was the first. And so that was a very nice moment. And in fact, the Monarch Garden here, again, even though it was small, was doing what it was intended. We have a monarch caterpillar here in front of City Hall. This picture was taken by someone who works in City Hall in the treasurer's office, Kathy Tenorio. And it's just, pretty fantastic. This little monarch garden is doing its thing and giving such delight to people who actually work in City Hall, coming there and taking pictures on their free time. And so the National Wildlife Federation put this picture on the cover of their guidebook, Monarch Conservation in America's Cities, to show that St. Louis was a pioneer in urban monarch conservation. Mayor Slay had a lot to do with that. And in fact, these 3 pictures on the bottom here were ones that he took in his personal home, yard. He grew his own monarch garden, wanted to walk the talk, and became very vocal, not only within the city and through Twitter and whatnot, but we went to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and gave a presentation to other mayors around the country about urban monarch conservation and its importance, not just for monarchs, but for people. So we went about doing what we could to create additional nearby nature opportunities. We got a grant through Scotts Miracle-Gro and partnered with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to create a monarch garden, larger scale one, medium size, if you will, down at Belle Reve Park. You can see that some of our partners, like at the Civic Center here, there's an enormous pollinator garden right across from where the Blues play that was put in. The city didn't lead that. We just made our graphic available and encouraged people to use the St. Louis monarch mix of plants, which you can see here. So it's been a great way. Folks have been participating. It's not just a city-led effort. This is something that the entire community has been involved with. So what the city then did get an additional grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to dig deeper, no pun intended, and do some further education and outreach, and also monarch butterfly research. And the research, by the way, was done in partnership with the Missouri Botanical Garden and St. Louis Zoo, and also UMSO. You can see who spearheaded which part of the research. And the research findings are put together in the final report to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and you'll see some familiar faces here in the, the report cover. I'm going to talk just about one of the aspects of that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant, and something that I like to consider an impact opportunity at schools. And through a leverage opportunity at the Missouri Botanical Garden and the Fish and Wildlife Service grant, we were able to collectively put in 50 school monarch gardens in the city of St. Louis. Here's a real opportunity, in my opinion, to center equity in environmental education, not just in the classroom, but outdoor experiences and activities. And of course, the teachers appreciate this. The community members who are going to walk by and see these Monarch Gardens hopefully will appreciate it. But the kids, the students who are participating, look at the smiles on their face. They're absolutely getting something out of it, whether it's in digging up a snail or catching or releasing a monarch butterfly. This is something that hopefully that they'll remember for a very long time. And the Zoo and the Garden, again, wrapped this all up by putting together a very useful educator guide and resource for pre-K through 12, grade 12 for Monarch Gardens in schools, and that again is available on the city's website. How-to, lesson plans, activities, things like that. Super impressive. Not all the time can we actively be engaged in these programs, and so we're trying to push out these opportunities so that individuals would take ownership of the opportunity and do things on their own time and be independent about it. We put together seed packets and gave them out, got a little bit of funding to do that. We put out maps to help people know where there were connecting with nature opportunities and some activities to do year-round to get people excited, hopefully, about connecting with nature. And we had a little bit of an incentive, a little carrot dangled, saying if you create a monarch garden using those St. Louis monarch mixed plants and you register, you log it on to an online map, you will be entitled, the first 250 people will be entitled to a yard sign. And so this proved to be enough of an incentive, I guess. People just wanted to do it even beyond when the signs ran out. And people just went wild about this project. I was getting emails, on a weekly basis. Here's my garden. Look what I got today. Here's my caterpillar. Here's my butterfly. And so I actually held a monarch photo contest in 2017 and all these different categories. And people submitted different pictures of these different categories. It was just been a phenomenal way that the community has been excited to participate and be part of the solution. So again, this is an indication to me, and it's not just good for the butterflies, it's good for people. There's just so much, rich growth and excitement there. So let's, talk about, does it matter for the monarch butterfly? And many of you have probably heard of Doug Talamy, and he worked with one of his grad students and did a research project to look at these smaller residential scale monarch gardens and asked that very question. And they concluded that, yes, these types of garden situations can be an effective tool for restoring habitat for monarch butterflies, which of course, as we know, is one of the most severe threats to the viability of monarch butterfly populations. So that's great to have that affirmation, if you will, from a confirmed researcher. But take a look at these pictures here. These were provided by a City of St. Louis resident, Kathy Bildner. This is a monarch butterfly laying eggs. Here is a monarch egg on a milkweed. Here's a caterpillar and, of course, chrysalis. To me, this says so much because obviously, I don't know how large her garden is, but it's certainly sufficient to supporting an entire life cycle of monarch butterflies here. But it's also something that she's very, very proud of. She sent me these pictures. She is nurturing and cultivating these opportunities. So how's it gonna, is it important? Is it gonna make a difference? Well, to that butterfly, it's gonna make a difference. To that individual, it's gonna make a difference. And when we talk about how many, folks doing this individually, but replicating it, and the collective impact, those monarch icons that pop up, now we can see, if you go on the website today, you can see 422 folks have registered their monarch gardens in the city of St. Louis. And you can see it's all over the city of St. Louis. So this is something that is good for the monarchs and good for at least 422 individuals and their families and students. So replication is key. Scaling is another thing that is super important. And I'm not going to have a lot of time to go into the details, but after going into the small discrete size, we wanted to go larger, and we decided to create a pollinator pathway all along the Mississippi River and create, we're fortunate to get a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and to create the St. Louis Riverfront Butterfly Byway. And Brightside St. Louis, in partnership with some cost share from Missouri Department of Conservation, orchestrated the planting of about 31 acres all throughout. You can see the little spots here all along the Mississippi riverfront of pollinator habitats. So now we're talking about scale as well as quantity. And on those different Monarch St. Louis Riverfront Butterfly Byway locations, there are some signage to encourage ecoliteracy and interpretation. Speaking of the arch, of course, along the Mississippi River, you can see here at the bottom of your screen an orange blob, and that was one of about 30 monarch butterflies that I happened to see going by in about a 5-minute period one year. I happened to be there on a walking tour from October, and I realized, gosh, these monarch butterflies might be on their migration right past the Gateway Arch National Park, the arch on their way to Mexico. So in partnership with the National Park Service, we launched a new celebratory event called the Great Monarchs Migration Event. And for the past 5 or so years, we have been putting together a public-facing celebration to just invite people down to the arch to try on butterfly wings, to get their, buy their St. Louis Monarch Garden in a box, to make monarch origami, whatever it might be, and to just celebrate in the majesty of monarch butterflies and their incredible migration. So let's return to our ecoliteracy survey. We went back in 2018 and asked the follow-up, the same questions from the ecoliteracy survey to see if we had moved that needle on the dial. Remember, in 2014, 44% were aware of things that they could do to help monarch butterflies. 2018, we had moved it to 59%. That's an improvement. Factual understanding. We had asked, what plant does a monarch require? In 2014, only 45% correctly responded. Drum roll. In 2018, 74% correctly responded. So here's a significant boost. People have, learned more in the past few years, and their awareness has been raised, and hopefully their factual understanding increased to help both monarchs and people. A small cautionary tale that I don't have time to go into is about not imposing what a biologist or scientist or passionate anybody, a prairie enthusiast might want on the community. It's important to listen to the community. In partnership with Washington University, the city, and some of its other partners, the Department of Conservation, we came up with this plan and a proposal to really build on this fabulous Calvary Cemetery remnant prairie. And we went to the community in Baden and said, what do you think about having more prairie landscaping in your community? This would be really great and tie into the prairie. The people in the community said, well, that's okay. But what we'd really like is a community garden for our youth, things for them to do after school to grow food and stay out of trouble. So the Missouri Botanical Garden led that effort and partnered at a church in the Baden area, put together a program with the youth to put in community gardens. It's just super important to listen to what the community wants and factor that in. Of course, the community garden does very well with pollinators, and so you can certainly plant some prairie plants around those community gardens, but as long as you're listening to the community and factoring in their preferences and needs, I think my experience has been you can go a lot farther. So I'm going to transition and into a little bit more of a conversation about the nexus between climate action, equity, and green stuff. We did a climate hazards reporting endeavor with the East West Gateway Council of Governments and found out that, maybe no surprise, extreme heat is the #1 concern. It's already here, impact of climate change, and it's just going to get worse. And so when we knew that, that became the foundation, well, all of the findings, but especially that became a foundation of the city's climate action adaptation plan. There are 5 different mitigation goals and a number of strategies, and 3 different adaptation goals and a number of strategies. I wanted to highlight here in red those that are particularly attuned to equity, health, and people's health and well-being. So this is already baked in. Equity is already baked into the climate action adaptation plan in some respects, but there was room for more, which I'm going to get to in a moment. One of these specific strategies was to address urban heat island because extreme heat is such an issue. And the companion to Park Score that I talked about earlier is Park Serve. And one of the heat maps that they come up with here is urban heat island. And here is the one for St. Louis. And you can tell in the darker areas it is the hotter areas. And then some other data sets have turned up, and St. Louis has ended up in the top 10 of cities with fastest growing urban heat islands and cities with fastest growing overnight urban heat islands. These are not one of the top 10 lists that you want St. Louis to be on. Obviously, we want to be doing something about this. The city's Division of Forestry did a really interesting experiment a few years ago. They looked at 2 streets, one with no street trees, one with street trees, both in the city of St. Louis on the same day, and took the temperature at the same time on the same day. And you can see a 16-degree difference associated with the presence or absence of trees. That's pretty remarkable, the difference, arguably, of street trees or no street trees. So that has been sort of the underpinning for a really fantastic partnership between the city's Park Recreation Forestry Division, the Office of Sustainability, to center equity in tree planting. So one of the first things, we were fortunate to get a grant from the Funders Network called the Partners for Places grant, and we were going to have enough to plant 500 trees in 4 city parks. And we wanted to figure out where those city parks should go, where those parks should be. And so we layered a number of data sets, and this is with the help of East West Gateway. And so some of them were trees, and some of it was about stormwater, and some was tree canopy. But we wanted it to have a real triple bottom line focus, and so we wanted to factor in crime. And so we looked at high crime areas and areas where there were youth and youth having issues with crime. And we layered the data sets, and that became our priority focus. And here we also invited in all of the tree plantings first responders, police and firefighters, so that they could have opportunities to interact and engage with members of the community and build relationships in a constructive manner by planting trees, something positive, instead of pointing fingers or passing judgment. We also have an element of that grant where we're hiring the youth and giving them paid youth jobs and training. And you can see them smiling here at their certificates of completion with members of the Urban Forestry Division. And so that was also another successful economic aspect of that grant. Running out of time, so I'm going quickly here. So also another intentionality recommendation is to assess and address climate vulnerability. What is climate change doing to people? Who is most susceptible and most vulnerable? And are there people in the city of St. Louis who are disproportionately burdened by the impacts of climate change? And so we again took a number of different maps and layered them, but this time we did it a little bit different. Instead of just layering them, we weighted them, and we used the rubric that the city of Minneapolis had used and just followed their rubric, and we ended up with this aggregated social vulnerability score. Again, all of this is available online. And the challenge with that was it was static, and so that was done in 2018. We have this crackerjack guy in the city's planning and urban design agency, in the division in which I work, who put together a tree planting suitability model with different variables and scoring that reflected a funder's priorities and criteria. And in this case, we had a project coming up with SSM Health, and we wanted to focus on extreme heat and climate justice and address climate vulnerability in certain areas. And so we weighted things accordingly. and we found out where we were going to make the best impact, have the best impact, and that's where we focused our tree planting effort. This was a year ago, December, and we're going to have a second one next week with SSM Health. Very fortunate to have generous funders in the community. So, and then since then, another tool has become available that I'll just point out, but it confirms what we did in-house, and that is the American Forest has come up with a tree equity score, and I've printed, if you drag this on their actual live website, you can see the numbers change depending on where you are in the city. And this is basically where we did our tree planting. So this is another fabulous tool. You can go to the website and pull up St. Louis City or County, and they'll have these tree equity scores available. Real quick, I wanted to mention as an intentionality priority, respect. Why respect? What are these things in these red circles? These are migratory wading birds. And these were dozens and dozens of nests in a 2-block area in the city of St. Louis, just west of the city of St. Louis. And I think it was just fabulous. I was so intrigued, you know, in this leafy area right in the heart of the city. I went down there with my camera. I took all these pictures. I was so excited to see these magnificent migratory wading birds, nesting herons, black-crowned night herons. And then I realized, I looked down and looked around me, and I saw a lot of bird poop. And I saw a lot of broken eggs and smelly fish. And I thought, my gosh, it's one thing for me to come in as an outsider and take these pictures and get this moment of joy, but it's important to be respectful of the people who live there. Maybe they don't like seeing the bird poop and the broken eggs and the fish. And so to foster this coexistence between urban wildlife and bird life and people, we have to be sure to factor in people and respect the needs of the wildlife, but also the needs of the people. This is just a reminder about the evolution of our tree planting approach. First, we were just layering data sets. Then we were layering data sets, but giving them a weighted rubric. And then we were factoring in customized, tailored priorities and criteria that were relevant for the funder in that case. And there's, you know, data sets are going to change, and priorities are going to change, and resources are going to change. And so all of these things you need to be nimble and move toward. So here's my last slide, I believe, just a summary of what we can all do to pull it all together to be climate conscious, race conscious, and species conscious. It is not an either or, it is an all of the above, whole love approach. And we've seen this from the United Nations, combining biodiversity and climate change in their thinking, to national level approaches like the Justice 40 initiative and the 30 by 30 campaign. These things are finally coming together. The opportunity is here. Here's my top 10 hits of intentionality, if you will. And there's so much more that we can do when we're on a great path forward. I'm sorry that I went a little long. Hopefully we have a chance for some questions, but if you have some follow-up for me, please feel free to reach out to me. There's my email. There's the City of St. Louis Sustainability website. You are welcome to contact me afterward. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Catherine, for a really wonderful talk. It's really great to hear about all of your initiatives throughout St. Louis to increase equitable access to nature. We are about at time, but we'd like to ask at least a couple of questions here. The first one is from Barbara Kunkel, who asks, have the current and recent mayors of St. Louis followed Mayor Slay's example in taking the Monarch Pledge?
The National Wildlife Federation has just changed you didn't have to change it depending on the mayor. They have just changed it this year, and so we have continued to be a part of the pledge as a city, but going forward, it will be up to Mayor Jones to actually continue to participate in the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So that was just a new change from the National Wildlife Federation.
Great. Wow, I really enjoyed this talk, and I actually want to set up a meeting with you because I'm working on pretty similar issues, and I have been meaning to for a while. So I will email you right after this. But so I'll save my questions until then. But I did want to ask Actually, this is more of a comment, but it seems like a neat idea. I'll post it here. Okay, so Tara asks or says St. Louis's LRA owns over 8,000 vacant lots in the city and does nothing but mow them. They're repositories for illegal dumping. It's a great opportunity to increase green space in environmental justice areas. So I guess the question would be, do you agree? And what are the barriers to this? Or is it something that's about to happen? Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The city has many vacant lots, and this has been a focus area for the city for a long time. And in fact, Gerardo Camelo has done some fascinating research looking at those vacant lots and has found out that the vacant lots themselves host a disproportionately wonderful, abundant number of bees on the vacant lots. So there's some correlation, a good thing about vacant lots and bees. And anyway, so there are a lot of opportunities, but there are also some challenges, and you have to weigh, again, what does the community want, and what's in the best interest for that neighborhood or block. And sometimes they want some kind of economic return. So going out into the community and listening to them and hearing what their priorities are and seeing if you can't do that both get them an economic and an ecological return on their investment, if you will, is something that in particular the Green City Coalition is focused on. And the Green City Coalition is an offshoot of something that we started, the Urban Vitality and Ecology Initiative, and it focused specifically on vacant land, and in particular vacant land with issues associated with stormwater. But the Green City Coalition has been working especially in North City in 4 different neighborhoods, and there are some remarkable success stories that they have been responsible for accomplishing. And I encourage you to go to the Green City Coalition website to look at some of the things that they have done and are planning to do going forward, mostly related to vacancy.
Well, thank you again, Catherine. Unfortunately, we are out of time here. We do have a couple more questions that were posted to the YouTube live chat, but your video will remain on YouTube with the questions posted. So you're free to go back after the talk and read those questions and perhaps even touch base with the people who asked them. I'm sure everybody watching at home is giving you just a fabulous round of applause. It's been really a really fascinating and enlightening talk, and we were just thrilled to host you today. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
No, I really appreciate it. Great. Thank you all. I appreciate it. It's been a great honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you, Catherine, again for joining us, and thank you everybody at home for tuning in.